Hey, you're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. At the start of every week, I sit down with another journalist to talk about the most fascinating stories in the news and how they affect the Pacific Northwest. We call it Front Page. And welcome back to Front Page. It's a lady who breaks news more often than Julio Rodriguez breaks bats. Melissa Santos of Axios Seattle. Welcome.
Well, that's the only time I've been compared to an athlete in my entire life, so thank you.
I don't know. I haven't seen your baseball swing, so we'll have to reserve judgment on that. Really appreciate you being here, Melissa. And we are going to get to our top story here. That is Juniper Blessing, who's singing a solo on Tom Petty's Wildflowers at a concert during her high school years at New Mexico School for the Arts. Friends and family are starting to share memories of Blessing, the 19-year-old University of Washington student who was killed in the laundry room of her off-campus apartment complex, Nordheim Court, near U Village. It's just a week ago Sunday that happened. According to classmates, Melissa, who spoke to the Seattle Times, Juniper loved video games. She chose her name because of a Pokemon professor in one of the Pokemon games. She loved the Hollow Knight series, which I've played, and apparently really loved the most recent entry, Silk Song. She was majoring in atmospheric sciences at UW, as well as continuing to study music and philosophy. Just a gorgeous voice that you heard there just during her high school years. She did a solo for the UW Chorale Blue Planet program last year, the Times reports. And I'll just read quickly from the family statement that was provided to the media. Juniper was simply the most amazing human being we have ever known, highly intelligent, extremely talented, and deeply sensitive to the needs of others. Juniper's loss not only devastates us, but diminishes the world. Perhaps most importantly, Juniper was courageously living their life as who they were until it was cut tragically short. Blessed with many loving friends, family members, and mentors, Juniper will be deeply missed. And UW's Trans Student Collective held a community grief and healing event on Saturday where they asked the media to not attend. And as far as I can tell, the media did respect that. At this point, there is a 31-year-old man in custody. This is somebody who turned themselves in to Bellevue police on Wednesday after a surveillance camera photo of a suspect was circulated by police. He's being held for investigation of premeditated first-degree murder, bail set at $10 million, and we're expecting a charging decision any hour now from the King County Prosecutor's Office. Melissa, what stands out to you about this story?
I think that, even though you have a suspect in custody, I don't think that the community feels safer because of that. And I think that this partly goes to Seattle and Washington State more broadly, sort of being and trying to be a safe haven for trans individuals from around the country, but then having something like this happening to a member of that community in, what is student housing. It's not a dorm on campus, but it's off-campus student housing. And I think that makes all students, I would feel more unsafe knowing that happened there of all places. And to someone who, we don't know all about her family history, but, someone who may have come here thinking it would be a welcoming place and for acceptance, and having something like this happen to them is really terrifying, I think.
Yeah.
People.
And I mean, that's what we hear from other trans community members who have moved here. I talked to a group just a few months ago called Traction, which is Trans Community Action. They have this Project Open Arms program where they help people resettle because the numbers of people moving here have increased a lot after policies like, Kansas changed the law to revert everybody's gender back to what they were assigned at birth. And so people just, their driver's licenses were invalidated, more than 1,700 people overnight. And so when things like that happen, you see a lot more people deciding to move to blue states, blue cities in particular. But as you say, this was supposed to be a safe place, but that did not save Juniper. We're going to hear more from when the charges are actually filed about what they think about the motives here. But it's just devastating. And it's devastating to, see, again, like the family statements seemed like a loving, supportive family and just a huge group of friends. And that this could still not protect Juniper is just absolutely heartbreaking.
And I mean, always, this is cliched, but as I get older, 19 years old is just such a young person to lose. I mean, that's the other reason I think it hits so hard.
Yeah.
And any loss of life is is such a tragedy, but that young in college is also really hard.
Yeah. So I have questions, and I know that the residents of Nordheim Court have also talked to the Daily about this, about security measures at the building. Apparently, the laundry room door was broken for a long time before this happened. That's where this crime occurred. Apparently, somebody could get in through the garage and just have free access to the laundry room where Juniper was found. Students had talked to the Daily about Greystar Real Estate, which acquired Nordheim Court in May of 2024, about not doing the kind of maintenance work that might have, at least secured this room. University of Washington released a statement saying Nordheim Court is operated by Greystar, and the UW is working with Greystar to ensure residents there are receiving support and resources in light of this tragedy. The other news out of this today is that the Seattle LGBTQ Commission has formally recommended that the city declare a state of civil emergency to support people moving here who are fleeing the policies, like I mentioned, in red states, especially trans and gender non-binary people. They're basically saying that they want to mobilize city services, make sure that groups like Traction have the kind of support they need in order to help people resettle. So we'll keep watching that. Any final thoughts on this story, Melissa?
I do. The emergency proclamation, I'm still sort of trying to get my head around what that would do, but they are talking about, potentially it being tied to some emergency services for people in that community. So I'm interested to see how that plays out, I guess, if it does happen, and then what that would mean for folks.
Yeah. And again, we are waiting for a decision on charging from the King County Prosecutor's Office. They are awaiting the referral from investigators. So all of that will take its course, and we will bring that to you on KUOW as soon as the news breaks. Moving on to our next story on Front Page.
A moratorium is really meant to allow us to create rules and regulations. We have lots of existing data centers. And at least, in my opinion, I don't see us having a permanent ban on all data centers, but I do think we need to have appropriate rules and regulations.
That is City Council member Eddie Lynn, Seattle City Council member at a Land Use and Sustainability Committee meeting on the 11th of May. Seattle's weighing a one-year moratorium on large data centers. Melissa, you have been reporting on this for Axios Seattle. What's going on? I mean, first of all, what prompted this and what is being proposed?
There were four companies that were proposing at one point, sort of softly, 5 different data centers in Seattle that would have used a lot of power. And now we still have 3 that I guess are still potentially on the table looking to locate. 2 have backed out as reporting has happened on this. I think there's been a little backlash, but there's been a lot of concern about if these come in and they're, using between 20 to 30% maybe of the city's, current power supply usage, that would be a maximum, of course. How would that affect our rates for electricity? How would that affect other residents' ability to have reliable power? So the city is looking at, and now this legislation has finally dropped, a moratorium for 1 year saying no new centers could open in our city till we figure out what we want to do with these. Because right now in city code, there actually isn't a definition for data center exactly. So even this moratorium defines what a data center would be. And that's one step. And then also they're wanting to set sort of standards for small data centers versus large, related to how close they can be together, what would the power use be, what about water use, what about other impacts to jobs maybe. So all of that stuff they want to consider thoughtfully, I guess, during a proposed moratorium period.
And there is legislation on this now, right? You were looking at this morning.
Yes. Last week when I was writing, they hadn't quite put the legislation online yet, but now there is a proposed moratorium and it's going to be talked about further in committees, I think, in this week and next week. There's also a resolution kind of that's more overarching saying we need to look at this because it's a big concern, just kind of a council statement of what they theoretically, are concerned about. And so, there's also an effort within this to, set sort of a rate system so that these data centers, should they be here, no one's coming yet at this time, but should they locate here, they have to kind of pay their own way a little bit. And the rates the demand that they might impose wouldn't be passed on to other people in the form of rate increases. I think that's a big concern. And then also just the amount of energy that they might use. So that's all stuff that they want to talk about in this moratorium and set standards for.
Yeah, so we'll be watching that as it kind of works its way through the City Hall process. Do we know where these things were going to be?
No, and when I reached out to Seattle City Light, they were really saying, hey, no one's really proposing this. They kind of was like a gentle kind of exploration, and so no one's currently planning to locate. They've been really clear on that. So I think that might also be why we don't know exactly where. There's not really like formal written proposals for these things yet, so we don't know.
Yeah. I found it interesting. You spoke with Joe Wynn, who, talked about the fact that this is sort of a fact of life if we're going to grow our AI capacity in the future, and opposing these things in a knee-jerk way just kind of plays into this idea that Seattle is against the kind of industry and businesses which it helped build and also helped build the city, right?
Right. And he's kind of saying we're reliant so much on AI and cloud computing services in Seattle compared to other places. But I mean, so how can we just say no, kind of thing? I mean, does that make sense? I think that Eddie Lin would say, they're, like he said, that we're not trying to ban them all forever, but they want standards around what they would look like. But, Joe Wynn's point was interesting because it's like, can you say, no, we're not going to have those facilities here, only, in rural areas, only in Quincy, Washington, but then really have all these companies that are basing their livelihood around AI and the infrastructure for it. So it's kind of a push and pull there, and how that's going to work out as the demands increase, I think will be interesting.
Yeah, folks in Seattle want to be able to ask Claude things, but they don't want to have to see or hear or deal with the draw on the power and the water. Joe Wynn, by the way, the Chamber of Commerce representative, newly moved into that position. You mentioned Quincy. Greg Kim at the Seattle Times has been doing some reporting there about how the Grant County Public Utilities District is spending hundreds of millions of dollars to upgrade the transmission grid because the lines don't have the capacity to carry the power that are needed for all those data centers. Like Microsoft alone has almost 24 data centers there in Quincy. And as part of that project, the state is suing, the Public Utilities District is suing to get land from a bunch of landowners, including, where people live. Like 34 homes are going to be affected by these huge new lines that are like hundreds of feet tall, just like way bigger than what we're used to. Just the effects of this stuff is hard to quantify, Melissa, and the ways that people are reacting now is starting to be clear. Like the opposition is certainly growing to data centers.
Right. And that's part of what that sort of the resolution that is not the moratorium, to get all weird and technical about it, kind of talks about that. Like if we have to upgrade our systems to accommodate these data centers, should other ratepayers have to pay for it? We think not, is kind of what the resolution's talking about. So like finding a way to disperse those costs or have the data centers cover it for any grid updates is another thing they're going to be looking at. And
we're going to have Joe Wynn actually on later in the show to talk with my colleagues Kat Smith and Scott Greenstone on Sound Politics, kind of about that idea of like, is Seattle turning hostile to big business, the ongoing conversation. In the meantime, let's get to our last story on Front Page today. Ooh, it's a phone call. Should you pick it up? Maybe not, because people who are trying to protect you from scams are increasingly saying you probably shouldn't answer your phone if you don't know the number. This is a story, Melissa, I have just not been able to get out of my head. It's from the Spokesman Review. It's that story of a retired police officer in Garfield, Washington, in Whitman County, who got taken for a ride by scammers who impersonated his daughter using an AI-generated voice clone tool. They fooled Mark Young, retired police officer, so somebody used to kind of having people try to maybe hide the truth from him. Mark was convinced that his daughter needed help after a car accident. He ended up wiring scammers $13,000 to try to save her. This was a multi-day ordeal, and it ended when Mark passed a note to an assistant manager at a Pullman Bank branch.
Yeah, an analog thing.
Exactly, an analog thing. And the bank branch got in touch with Mark's wife, who was on the phone with their daughter, and Mark just broke down in tears when he found out that indeed his daughter was not being held hostage by these scammers. But the scary thing is that the scammers were able to, quote unquote, put the daughter on the phone because of these AI duplication tools. And apparently these imposter scams are growing more and more. And the FTC is saying you really have to watch out, especially if the scammers want you to pay in a way that it's impossible to get your money back. Cryptocurrency, wiring money, gift cards, things like that.
Do you know if he got his money back? I'm not looking.
No, he has not gotten his money back because he wired it.
Yeah.
And he wired it to places like in Mexico, things like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And he's a former journalist, too. And I think we're kind of also former cop, former journalist.
Yep.
If that guy can be fooled, I'm like, oh, boy.
Naturally suspicious. Also, you and I do enough radio that our voices are extremely easy to clone.
I'm done. You're done. You are. They could replicate anything you ever said.
I am extremely done. Yeah. The recommendations from safety experts are have a code word with your family. Make sure you check multiple sources. If somebody is pushing you to move fast and to send money in a way, again, that is not retrievable, that is a really bad sign. So anyway, watch out for those voice clones.
But then they say don't answer the phone, and it's like sometimes you got to answer the phone. You know what I mean?
Yeah, in our jobs, how can you not answer the phone?
You have to answer the phone. So, I mean, there's so many recordings probably of me going, hello, this is Melissa, to some random person who's going to try and... But then again, the radio, I'm already done. It doesn't matter, I guess.
I'm just happy that Mark's daughter was okay, but also everybody watch out for these impersonator scams. They're trouble. That's Front Page for today. Melissa Santos, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to have you on KUOW, even if it provides scammers a lot of material for your voice clone.
What? It's maybe worth it. I guess we'll see how much I get taken for.
It's a price. Luckily, journalists don't have any money, so it's a price we're willing to pay. You're listening to Soundside on KUOW. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime right here online at KUOW.org, or of course on your favorite podcast app.